Young lad, righteous. War can't buy great. Then craftsman so full of technique, make him feel like someone good and then alright. Show up at them night, cause we hard clean. Enough of them say them a do it, but them not do it like we. On them no for what them hear about. Warrior they are to what them hear about. Open up it, they can make it hear out. Anybody in the way them a feel clear out. Like switched up.
Hey everyone, today I present What if Sasuke Uchiha was in X-Men Evolution, Part 1. Now please enjoy. Xavier Mansion Fields. A lone figure laid on the branch of a tree, gazing into the vastness of the skies, his eyes tired from his thoughts. Peace did not become him, he was thrust into this world by an unknown force. Why he ended up here, he did not know. His ambition lost to the sands of the mysterious plane known as the universe. He had nothing to live for. As he gazed into the sky, his brother's smile emanated from it. He gritted his teeth in frustration and annoyance. This was not where he should be, this was not what he should be doing, and yet here he was, stuck in this accursed mansion. He did not want the kindness of the man that had offered him his home as he called it, but he had a debt he had to repay to him. He wouldn't leave unless he did repay it. It was a new purpose, his lost soul reacquainted with another longing to fulfill it. After failing to his previous goal, his ambition of revival lost, he had nothing to live for, except this. A man in a wheelchair rolled up to where he lay, concentration in his eyes yet smiling with kindness. Sasuke Uchiha had hated the man's smile, it reminded him too much of the blonde idiot who had proclaimed himself to be his best friend. Enjoying yourself, Sasuke? Questioned Professor Xavier as he came to a halt below the tree where Sasuke lay. His only question was answered by silence. Xavier sighed. He had been like this since the day he arrived. When Orochimaru offered him food, hunger got the better of him as he then accepted. Oro had said that he was a boy who carried too much of a burden for a child his age. Logan had agreed, recalling how he was used in the Weapon X program. He did not interact with any other people. He would either stay in the fields of the mansion, or would come in for something to eat. Another of his activities including slicing old tree barks with his Chidori blade, refining his skills. Logan had smirked at this and said that his style was reckless and a little tune-up was required. Sasuke had just grunted in response. The only time he would speak was if the professor needed something. When Scott had arrived, he had tried to befriend the crazed Avenger with a simple handshake. Sasuke had looked at his hand and then moved past him. Oro had told Scott to give him some time. Logan had told him that he was like that with everybody except the professor. The next was Jean Grey, the telepath. She had tried as well, pestering him to at least say a word. He had coldly stated to her to stay away from him. She was hurt and shocked. Despite the statement, he grew accustomed to her advances for friendship, even going as far to help her during a little trouble with her parents when they had stated that the mutant powers were a curse. He had abruptly replied what was on Xavier's mind. It was not a curse, but a gift. It was the way she used it that would define if it were a curse, or a gift. Burdened by vengeance, he spent majority of his days brooding. "We're growing, Sasuke," came another statement from Xavier. Sasuke just turned his gaze towards him. "I know how you feel, Sasuke, but I believe this was a second chance for you. Everyone deserves it, a chance for peace, a chance for a new life, a chance for love." Sasuke just exhaled his breath slowly. "You do realize I read your mind every time you are to your own thoughts?" Sasuke then sat up slowly and looked at him. "I know," he said. "You should let it go, Sasuke, get to know some of the other students. They would love to get to know you. You have indeed helped them when we were showing them that their powers are a gift and not a curse. Some admire you, others look up to you, and still others throw their jealous gazes of you. Scott and Jean continually ask for you. Each day after they return from school, the first thing they do is to search for you, yet you hide away in the darkness away from the light of their friendship." Sasuke jumped down from the branch of the tree. "They shouldn't." As he turned to leave, Xavier sighed again. "Sasuke, you don't owe me anything. You can stop thinking about how to repay me after we treated your injuries. You were hurt, that was the right thing to do, to heal you. and to give you a pulse to stay. This world is new and confusing, yes, but you owe us nothing. Sasuke stopped and looked back at the man in the wheelchair, his coal black eyes gazing at his form. I owe it to you, and I will repay it even if my life is what it costs Xavier. Xavier just looked on Sasuke's retreating form. Oro came up behind him and placed a comforting hand on Xavier's shoulder. Xavier just sighed. He's growing further away, Oro. He's dead in spirit, his eyes show nothing. When he first came here I saw great hate in him, but now, lifeless, stated Professor Xavier. I am concerned as well, Charles, but he has been growing a little closer to Scott and even Logan. Logan spars with him, showing him his flaws. Even though Sasuke is greater in skill, Logan has exceeded him in experience. When he saw Scott and Jean coming back from the school, he saw that boy Duncan the first believe along with his teammates picking on Scott. Jean tried to break the fight up, but proved futile. I had sent Sasuke to buy the groceries from the supermarket, so that he could get a look at the outside world. He had appeared in front of the group of attackers and had mashed their skulls to the pavement. Scott and Jean had pleaded him to stop. He did, narrated Oro while watching Sasuke's retreating form. I do not know Oro. When I had read his memories, the only longing he had was to see the blood of a boy the same age as he. His name was known as Naruto. Sasuke's lust for vengeance had driven him to the edge before he appeared here. His brother was the definition of a self-sacrificing hero, but Sasuke seeks to destroy all that his brother had wrought, all that he had fought for. His hatred consumed him, mused Xavier. And that is why we will help him, pester him, push him to a breaking point where he will give up his lifeless form and renew himself with this chance for redemption, said Oro, smiling at the professor. Xavier smiled. I hope and pray we do. Sasuke walked onto his training field. Logan had told him that he left his guard open during his third consecutive attack and that even an amateur could exploit it. He had lied, of course, so that Sasuke would open up a little more. He did. He had grown in skill and had also practiced his lightning manipulation, creating even more different elemental manipulation of the Chidori, but it was not enough. He had even perfected the Amaterasu, timing the attack at the exact time before the blood could even bleed from his right eye. He walked onto a bunch of stumps Logan had kept for him. He had kept a machine that would shoot the stumps into the air, and had asked Sasuke to slice it using the blade into 4 divisions. Sasuke found it a bit difficult at first, but quickly adapted to it. He could now slice anything with his eyes closed. He stopped on hearing the laughter of the other 2 people occupying the mansion. He ignored it as they came out of the mansion. He then pressed the machine, checking its speed could be increased. The activation of the machine had caused a rumbling noise, which he ignored, but it was not ignored by the other 2 people. They saw him and waved. Sasuke. He ignored them as they moved to him. 8 stumps flew into the air. He then jumped, closing his eyes, remembering what Logan had told him to do. The sound of slices were heard. The other 2 looked on. It was a daily occurrence seeing Sasuke do this. He then landed on the toes of his feet silently and placed his katana back in its holder. As he did that, 32 pieces of sliced stumps fell down neatly in a row. He then turned to move to a tree. Show off, muttered Scott. Jean elbowed him in the rib. Hey! Ow! Sasuke once again ignored them as he moved. Jean ran up to him, catching his shoulder. Listen, Sasuke, don't act like a loner. Come on, Scott wanted to get some pizza, come with us. Sasuke quickly shrugged her hand off his shoulder, and walked on. Jean then used her telekinesis to stop him. His hardened eyes turned to look at her. She smirked. Scott started chuckling. He knew Jean would do this one day or the other. Frankly, Sasuke had it coming. Sasuke momentarily decided to cast a genjutsu on her and move on, but he thought against it and gave her a chance to say what she wanted to say. Listen, you either come with us, or I drag you with us with my power, said Jean in a serious tone. Better do as she says, man. She's like Shere Khan when she's serious, said Scott with amusement in his voice. Jean turned her head to look at Scott, annoyance etched in her face. Scott gulped. I'll just be quiet now. So Sasuke. Before she could complete her question, he was gone. Both of their eyes widened as they saw his retreating form laying on a pile of grass a long distance from them. How did he? Jean then recalled about what Professor Xavier had told him about Sasuke being able to place illusions on people. A voice then rang out in both their minds. Scott, Jean, get Sasuke and come meet me in the mansion. There's someone you need to meet. Jean just blew her hair frustration. Scott just chuckled as he moved into the mansion. Well, Jean, I'd ho best getting Mr. Loner over there to the mansion. Jean just grew in frustration as she moved to where Sasuke lay. Sasuke just gazed into the sky again thinking about his brother. Jean came up to him. Come in, Sasuke, Professor Xavier wanted us to meet someone. Don't make me use my powers on you again, said Jean. Sasuke got up slowly and moved into the mansion. Scott and the professor waited for them in their study. When they reached the study, they saw someone covered in a cloak, a brown cloak. Sasuke just viewed him. Xavier mentioned. Ah. Good you both are here, smiled the professor. He then turned his gaze towards the mysterious stranger. This is Kurt Wagner. He will be staying at the institute. Like you all, he is a mutant, though his mutation has become more physical in nature, introduced Xavier. Scott then held out his hand to meet Kurt's. Nice to meet you. My name is Scott. He then pointed to Jean, and that's Jean, and that's Sasuke. Kurt then moved his hand to meet Scott's. A blue furry hand extended. Scott was a little surprised. Kurt thought it was fear. He quickly withdrew it. Sasuke just viewed on. Jean just looked on and broke the awkward silence. So your mutation's physical, huh? Smiled the redhead. Kurt then turned his hooded cloak towards her. Yes. He replied. She then extended her hand. Kurt was hesitant at first. He looked to Xavier for an answer. Xavier just smiled. Kurt then took her hand and shook it. He then did the same to Sasuke. Sasuke just viewed him with indifference. Sasuke turned to Xavier, ignoring Kurt. Is this why you called me here? Don't waste my time, Xavier. He then moved out of the study room. Kurt looked hurt as he removed his hood. Jean and Scott just looked on at Kurt, sympathy in their eyes. Don't bother about him, Kurt. He doesn't trust anybody and he's arrogant with everyone, smiled Scott. Jean then continued. He's really a nice guy deep down, but he has trouble showing it. Don't worry, I'm sure you'll get to know him better on later, smiled the redhead. Kurt smiled though. Xavier just looked on. Sasuke was making progress. This time he actually responded to why Xavier wasted his time with these meetings. The first time when he met Scott and Jean, he wouldn't even look at them. He smiled a bittersweet smile. He's on the right track, thought Xavier as he watched the interaction between the students. Xavier Institute Field. Sasuke went back to his pile of grass and lay on it again. This time Oro came up to him. He sighed in annoyance. These people wouldn't leave him alone. Did you meet the new addition, Sasuke? Questioned the Weather Witch. Her question was met with silence. Oro had reminded him a lot of his mother Mikado Uchiha. She was kind and caring, too caring. I'll take your silence as a yes then. She smiled. Sasuke kept his brooding demeanor up. When you're ready, come back to the mansion for dinner, all right? And again silence was the answer given to her. Sasuke then watched as Oro flew back into the mansion. Why do they even care? Danger Room. Logan had set up Sasuke in the danger room to run an obstacle source. Sasuke was annoyed at first but then took it as an opportunity to practice his speed and agility. He showed Sasuke how to increase the level of difficulty in the danger room. Sasuke felt that he should start at the highest level, his Uchiha pride not wavering. He did just that. Logan had told him to be careful. Sasuke had ignored him. Xavier and Storm had rolled into the control center when Logan had told them that Sasuke was attempting the highest setting in the danger. Storm had voiced her concern, so had Professor Xavier. Logan just shrugged it off, saying that the runt could handle it, but just in case he couldn't, he had asked the both of them to oversee his training. They had obliged, and then Logan rode his bike out of the mansion. Sasuke now felt while Logan had told him that it was hard, the obstacle course proved a great deal of effort was necessary to surpass it. He quickly slid through the sliding doors lined with spikes and jumped into the air to avoid an incoming blast at him. He then again flipped in the air to avoid a swinging slicer. He then landed gracefully on the floor. Xavier was impressed, Storm was as well. She then proceeded to leave out of the mansion to control the weather for her beloved plants. Sasuke just continued on with his course, although he did slip up at one point. 8 incoming blasts had caught him off guard when he dodged a mace at his head. Xavier's eyes widened. An explosion was heard from the danger room. Xavier looked around to see if Sasuke was okay. What he saw were purple bone-like structures protecting the boy, and his eyes transformed into a star-pointed red eyes. Sasuke then deactivated his Susanoo and continued the charade again. Xavier sighed. That power of his, interesting. It seems that it also produces some kind of armor for him, just like a mutation, but he had told me it was a bloodline limit, so I see this bloodline limit in their world is a complementary to our world's X gene. Sasuke continued his dodges, he didn't tire out. Xavier mentioned. Kurt walked down the stairs of the mansion. A shift in the weather startled him. Just a moment ago it was calm and quiet on the outside, yet now lightning was showing. He wondered if it had anything to do with Mr. Oro's powers. As he continued his musings, a strong wind blew into the mansion, sending him sprawling onto the ground with a greenish man on top of him. He quickly shoved him off of him, and they leapt to their feet. "Whoa, who are you? You blue fuzzy bunny?" questioned Toad. Kurt was offended at the nickname. "My name is Nightcrawler, and at least I don't smell like chewed up unwashed tapioca shoes," came the snide remark. Toad boiled with anger. He hated people who said that he stunk. "I am gonna kick your butt, you blue furry freak," Nightcrawler smirked. Toad then jumped at him, only to land on the floor. He then looked around for the magician. "Too slow, lil man," came the reply from the chandelier. Toad got even angrier as he jumped to the chandelier. Nightcrawler jumped onto Toad's back as he jumped and bounced off him. Todd hit the ground. Xavier, hearing the commotion, rolled into the room with Oro. "That's enough, Kurt. If Todd wishes to join the institute, he may do as he pleases," said Professor Xavier. "The only desire I have is to kick Blue Boy's butt over there," shouted Todd as he jumped again to reach Kurt, and he shot out his tongue. Kurt then teleported as Todd's tongue wrapped around him, taking him to another location. Danger room. Sasuke was about to leave the danger room, when an alarm sounded in the danger room. Sasuke just viewed the owl room skeptically, thinking it was a malfunction. He was then greeted to the voices of two unfamiliar people. "Og! Where are we?" questioned a dazed Nightcrawler. Todd rubbed the daze out of his eyes and replied. "How should I know? You're the one who brought us here." Danger. Intruders detected, activating self-defense system level 3. The two were shocked as they dodged a large metallic slicer that tried to cut them in half, then began a dance of escapades as they tried to dodge the machines and lasers trying to kill them. Nightcrawler landed on a wall. As he did that, a metallic machine hit him. He grunted in pain as he teleported again, but this time luck did not favor him as a laser pointed directly at where he teleported to. "Oh no!" came the whisper, but before the laser could hit him, Sasuke appeared and sliced the machine in two. Nightcrawler gasped as he fell to the ground. As he was falling, he suddenly found himself floating in the air. He then looked around frantically as to why he was floating. His eyes then caught a sight of Jean. "You!" he gasped. "Are you an angel?" questioned the confused blue demon. "When I want to be," smiled Jean. They then saw Scott blowing up two laser blasters. They were in awe at the speed at which Sasuke moved, slicing all the machines in half. He bounced around the room and sliced all the machines into two. Kurt then got a bright idea. "Oh, I see, this is a training exercise." He then teleported as Jean's eyes widened. "All I have to do is to unplug it and it'll all." As Kurt removed the machine from its power source, the machine then began firing at everyone sporadically. Sasuke was annoyed, as he disappeared again and sliced the laser blast, then landing on his feet, effectively creating an explosion behind him. "Show off," muttered Scott. "Forget this. I'm out of here," shouted a weary Todd as he jumped. A purple fiery skeletal arm caught him. Todd was scared out of his pants as he struggled to get free, and looked into the evil eyes of the crazed Avenger. Everyone was awed at what Sasuke did. "Is this his power?" questioned Scott in his mind. Unbelievable, whispered Jean. Kurt looked on with awe. It seemed as if Sasuke was about to kill Todd just as he did to Danzo. This scenario reminded him of it. Hey man, please. I didn't mean to cause you guys any trouble, I promise. Shouted a panicked Todd. Sasuke just locked his eyes with Todd's eyes. Todd saw all of Sasuke's vengeance by just gazing into his eyes. It scared him too much. Please man, I'm sorry, stuttered Todd. Just then a broad-shouldered man entered the danger room along with Professor Xavier and Oro. Run. Deactivate that armor and let him down. Came the man's voice. Sasuke just saw Logan and complied. He let Todd go. Todd, scared stiff from the encounter, promised himself never to enter the mansion ever again. As he left for good. I'm afraid Todd is not ready to join us just yet, sighed Professor Xavier. Logan then walked up to Sasuke and grabbed the collar of his shirt. Sasuke looked lifeless. It scared even Logan to a certain extent. Were you actually going to kill him? Runt. Don't lie to me. I saw the crazed look in your eye, like it reminded you of something, said an angry Logan. Jean, Scott and Kurt were shocked when they heard what Logan told to Sasuke. They couldn't believe that he would actually do that. Sasuke didn't answer, just looked lifelessly at Logan. Logan's frustration grew. Answer me. Sasuke! Shouted Logan. Oro walked up to Logan and placed a hand on his shoulder. Let it go, Logan. I'm sure Sasuke wouldn't do that, right Sasuke? Questioned Oro as her gaze rested on him. Her answer was met with silence. Sasuke? She questioned again. Xavier was reading Sasuke's mind. Good, he wasn't going to kill him, he was just frustrated. Smiled Xavier. No, Ro, we need to deal with his problem right now, said Logan as his gaze turned on a lifeless Sasuke. Sasuke looked on. He wouldn't, Logan. Came the reply from Oro. TCH, why does she care? Questioned Sasuke in his mind. Because she cares for you like you're her own, Sasuke. So do we all care about you, came the reply from Xavier. Sasuke cursed himself silently, forgetting that Xavier could read minds. Logan looked on. Let go of him, Logan, he wasn't going to kill Todd, he was just frustrated. Said a smiling Professor Xavier. Right, Runt. Better not try something stupid like that again, you gave me a hell of a scare, said a smiling Logan as he patted Sasuke on his shoulder. Sasuke then moved on with others watching his retreating form. Logan just sighed. Oro looked on and wanted Charles to answer her question of the answer he had given Sasuke. He was thinking about why you care so much about him, Oro, that is why I gave him that answer. Came Xavier's reply. Oro smiled a bittersweet smile. To him, you remind him of his own mother. Continued Xavier. He doesn't want to show that he cares. That's all, smiled Xavier. Scott decided to make himself known. Professor, why is he like that? I mean, he barely talks to anyone, and he doesn't care about us a bit. Yeah, it's like one moment he cares and the next he doesn't even want to talk to us, added Nightcrawler. Jean just looked on. Professor Xavier then looked to Aurora and Logan for confirmation. I guess they have a right to know, Chuck. Came Logan's reply. I agree, they deserve the truth, Charles. Editor Oro. Xavier just sighed and turned to three students. You can ask me questions and not Sasuke after I tell you about him. The truth is, Sasuke is not of this world, he is of another dimensional plane. How he ended up here is a mystery to both him and me. He feels lost and lonely. Said Xavier. Their eyes widened. Scott just looked on skeptically. We're his friends, Professor. I mean, he could at least get to know us for all the time he's been in the mansion. Came Scott's reply. True, Scott, but think of this way. You are thrust into a new world, all your old friends and family lost to the wind, and you have nowhere to go and no way how to get back. Came Xavier's reply. But Professor, I understand, but like Scott said, he could always approach us, right? I mean, we approach him and pester him to make a bond of friendship with him, yet he ignores us. What does that speak volumes about? Said Jean. It's not that simple, Red. Came Logan's voice. The Runt is an avenger, he seeks nothing but vengeance. for what someone put him through, and now since he's here he's unable to fulfill it. That frustration builds upon him and he is sure to crack at any given moment, but he hasn't, just shows how strong he is on the inside. Vengeance? For what? Questioned a concerned Kurt. Xavier sighed at Logan's reply. Sasuke's whole family, his whole clan, were murdered when he was 8 years old. All of them gasped in shock. What? Questioned Scott. You heard him, Scott. Sasuke's family was murdered. Came Oro's reply. Jean had unshed tears in her eyes. Kurt looked on with sympathy. The runt doesn't like anyone showing him any pity on any occasion, that's why he puts up that tough guy exterior, said Logan. But Professor, who murdered his family? Came Scott's question. Xavier sighed with disappointment. It was his own brother, his own blood. He was 13 years old when he killed everyone in his clan. Sasuke sought to destroy him, but when they fought, his brother died with a smile on his face. Sasuke's mind raced with questions. He then learned the truth about his brother. His brother was an agent of his village. He cried tears of blood as he slaughtered his clan. It was a mission from his village. He killed his fellows and sacrificed everything to maintain the peace of the village. Sasuke couldn't handle the truth. His whole life was spent in training to kill his brother, but then this is thrown at him from an unknown perspective. He was beyond angry. They had used his brother as a vessel to maintain the peace. To Sasuke the peace didn't matter. He only wants his brother and his family back, his clan back. His clan had planned a coup d'etat, to strike against the village for the injustice they had caused Sasuke's clan. That is where his brother took on the weight for the sake of peace, but he couldn't bring himself to kill his little brother, and now since Sasuke is here now, his goals are unfulfilled, his desire for vengeance is slipping, he hates himself for it, explained the professor. At the end everyone had sympathy in Thrice. Wow, came Scott's reply. Yeah, added Nightcrawler. Jean looked on with sympathy in her eyes. This is why I ask you to give Sasuke time and some personal space. He will come around, but it requires time. That's why Logan and Oro pester him to train or to eat, so that he would open up to them, and so that he doesn't lose himself to his darkness, said Professor Xavier. The runt's a hard nut, I'll give him that, said Logan as he and Oro made their way out of the danger room. We understand, Professor, came the collective reply. Xavier Institute Fields Night. Sasuke sat near the bark of a tree and stared into space. He then saw the faces of Naruto, Sakura, and Kakashi. He gritted his teeth in annoyance. Even far away they don't leave my mind. The image then shattered to Itachi's smiling face. Sasuke gritted his teeth in anger. I will find a way back, even if it kills me, and then will I validate my brother's sacrifice, my clan's existence. Logan, Oro and the professor looked on at Sasuke's sitting form from a long way off, silently praying that Sasuke would come around. Their prayers were then answered as they saw smoke appear before Sasuke. Kurt had appeared. Sasuke wasn't fazed. He looked up at the blue demon. Kurt then broke the silence. I'm sorry I caused you so much trouble, Sasuke. Thank you for saving me from getting blasted. Sasuke didn't reply, just looked down to the grass again. Scott and Jean then approached him. He heard their footsteps. Sasuke, we know and what happened to your family. We're sorry, said Scott, for misunderstanding you like the way we did. Continued Scott. Come on, Sasuke, we're going out to get something to eat. Come on, said Jean. Sasuke didn't budge. She then knelt down to meet his coal black eyes. With her hand she raised his head by the chin. Sasuke let her. His eyes locked with hers. She smiled. Sasuke gritted his teeth. We know your pain, Sasuke. Now come and let's get you something to eat, said Jean. Yeah. Man, come on, I'm starving, said Scott, trying to lighten up the mood. Sasuke then shoved Jean away, and stood up. He started walking away. Hey! Shouted Scott. That wasn't nice, Sasuke! Shouted Kurt. Sasuke stopped. He turned his eyes to look at Jean. You cannot begin to fathom my pain, just leave me alone, he said. They watched the retreating form of the Avenger. Well, that went well, came Scott's sarcastic statement. I guess we should give him some more time, said Jean. I believe so, added Kurt. Logan, Aurora and the professor looked on at Sasuke's retreating form. A small smile graced their features. It's a start, Altis said Logan. The others nodded their head in response. Things would be very interesting from now on. X-Jet. Professor, why weren't the others brought along? Asked a curious Jean. Professor Xavier raised his head to look at her. He smiled. This girl, I believe you can connect with her more than any of the others, came the professor's reply. You are a model for what we represent, and this is why I brought only you along for this, continued the professor. Right, no pressure, came Jean's nervous chuckle. Charles Xavier just smiled at her. Is something on your mind, Jean? He questioned her. Jean met his gaze. It's nothing, professor, just thinking about how hard a life Sasuke must have lived. Xavier's gaze softened. Yes, it amazes me, the extent of human cruelty, to have lived a life for the majority of his life and then the truth thrown at him like nothing at all. Yes, it is indeed a great burden. Jean just looked on as the professor continued. But I believe some force sent him here for a chance at redemption, for another chance at life, for another chance to be human. If he had continued in his world, he may have slaughtered his best friend to get his revenge, and I believe he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he had done that. Jean saw the sadness in the professor's eyes. I promise you, professor, we will get him to open up somehow, said a smiling Jean. I pray you do, came the reply. Xavier Institute. So Mr. Oro, where did Jean and the professor go? Asked a curious Nightcaller. Charles took Jean to go meet a girl who had awakened her powers in Chicago. Depending on how long it takes, they might be there for a while, came Oro's reply. Scott just looked on. Did Sasuke come back to the mansion yet? Oro's eyes saddened. No, after your little talk with him yesterday, he hasn't come into the mansion ever since. He worries me at times. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. I guess it's best to leave him alone until he comes around, said Kurt. Scott looked on, frustration building. Man, he's such a jerk at times, shouted Scott. Do not judge him, Scott. He has gone through more than he should for a boy his age. He has seen blood on his hands. That is not something you can easily let go of. You but. Before Scott could finish, he heard an explosion outside the mansion. All three of them rushed to see what it was. Black flames encircled the Avenger, dancing around him. It changed into spikes and then into a wall. His incomplete Susanoo ribs also was active, covering him with the black flames. Sasuke was glad that he hadn't lost the ability to manipulate the black flames to an even greater degree, but he then heard footsteps coming to him. He ignored them. Scott came out first. What he saw was shocking. Black flames danced around Sasuke. He couldn't believe it. Sasuke was manipulating the flames. He just looked on at Sasuke's back. Aurora and Kurt soon followed him. Kurt's eyes widened. Whoa. Aurora, however, was shocked with concern. Sasuke. Stop that right now. You're going to hurt yourself. Sasuke just turned to look at her. When Aurora saw Sasuke's eyes, they were covered in blood, his left eye bleeding heavily. They gasped in surprise. He's hurt, said Scott. Yeah, he's bleeding heavily, continued Kurt. Sasuke then looked at the flames as he doused it with his eyes. He then grabbed his head in pain as he knelt down, pain engulfing him. He held his eyes in pain. As the fire and Susanoo armor deactivated, Aurora rushed to him. As he collapsed, breathing heavily, blood bleeding from his left eye, he was trying to create a new form of the Amaterasu. It had taken a while, but he finally had done it. He had refined his Inferno-style control to a greater extent. He was now able to shoot the Amaterasu with the Inferno-style manipulation. It pleased him. Sasuke! Shouted Oro as he drifted in and out of consciousness. He managed to stand up, groggy from his effort. Owa, ye, he whispered. Don't be an idiot, Sasuke. You're hurt, just stay down, we'll carry you to the medical bay, shouted Scott. Sasuke gritted his teeth. He then gently pushed his mother-like figure away as he made his way to the door of the mansion. As he entered the mansion, he fell. Oro shouted his name, but before he could fall, he was caught by Logan. Easy there, Runt, just rest, said Logan as Sasuke drifted into unconsciousness. He's so stubborn, and such a jerk. Ah. Forget this, I'm late for school. Come on Kurt, let's go, Scott discovered. Said Scott. Kurt then obliged as they made their way to Scott's convertible. Logan watched them as they went. Aurora came up to him. Is he going to be alright? Logan questioned a concerned Aurora. He's going to be alright, he's just overexerted himself, that's all, said Logan as he carried Sasuke back to his room. They then wiped the blood from his eyes, and washed his face, and applied some ointment to dull the pain. He's very strong, said Aurora. Logan nodded his head. His powers are unrivaled to any of us in this world. Hell, that even scares me. It's a wonder that he hasn't used it to kill us. Maybe he does care, he just doesn't want to show it, that's all, smiled Aurora. I'm gonna go out for a bit, take care of the runt, I'll be back after a bit, said Logan as he took his hand and moved out of the exit. Right, said Aurora. 3 hours later. Sasuke awoke from his rest. He felt renewed. He then got up from the table he lay on. He took in his surroundings. Cloths soaked in his blood were lying near, then proceeded to get his shirt touched with the symbol of the Uchiha. His gaze lingered on the emblem for a minute, and then he put it on, and he took his Chidori blade from the table, and moved out for the medical bay. He made his way up to the mansion. He didn't sense anyone in the mansion. He thought that they must have left. He then proceeded to the field to continue his training. He saw Aurora watering her plants. She was coming into the house. She was surprised to see him up already. She smiled at him. Sasuke stiffened. That smile made him remember too much about his own mother. Good, you're awake. How are you feeling now, Sasuke? Asked a concerned Aurora. Sasuke felt he at least owed the woman an answer. I feel fine, thank you for treating my wounds, came the whisper. Aurora was surprised. Sasuke actually responded to her, and he had actually thanked her. She thanked God for listening to her prayers. Good, now come and let's get you something to eat. Sasuke didn't budge. Aurora raised an eyebrow and stared at Sasuke, neither letting up. Aurora won the battle as Sasuke sighed. She then took him into the kitchen and made him a sandwich. He looked skeptically at the bread. It's not poison, Sasuke, go on, eat it, chuckled an amused Aurora. Sasuke then ate it. It was lined with tomato slices. He loved tomatoes, it's stated in the data book tongue, so don't kill me. Sasuke then finished eating the sandwich. He silently thanked Aurora for the meal and made his way out of the mansion. Where are you going, Sasuke? Questioned a smiling Aurora. Out, he replied. Right, no more training though, you still need rest. Sasuke silently slipped out of the mansion, gritting his teeth in annoyance. He decided training could wait. He then made his way to the garage, where Logan got off his bike. He saw Sasuke, and smelt an eerie scent as well. Sabertooth, he muttered. Sasuke just looked at him plainly. His attention then turned to Sasuke. Hey runt. You're up already? That's good. Ro was worried. Listen, I gotta take care of another errand. Stay here and don't cause any problems. Sasuke just raised an eyebrow at the older man. Logan noticed that. What? Don't give me that look of yours, runt. Humph, grunted Sasuke as he walked away. Logan smirked as he fired up his bike. He then rode out of the mansion. Unknown to him, Sasuke followed him using his ninja speed. He jumped from treetop to treetop. Logan then stopped near an old broken building. Sasuke stopped as well. He watched Logan as he sniffed the air. Sasuke then saw a man jump Logan. He had huge bulging muscles and a brown trench coat. His nails were elongated. It reminded him of Naruto's Kyuubi form. He quickly Shoryuji'd it off. Wolverine! Shouted Sabertooth as he jumped Logan. Sabertooth, said Logan as he used his legs to send Sabertooth flying. Sabertooth regained his stance. Only one of us will leave here alive, Logan smirked Sabertooth. Don't bet on it, bub, said Logan as he drawed out his claws. This was Sasuke's first time seeing Wolverine in action. He watched the fight intently. He then saw Sabertooth throw Wolverine off an edge and into the broken house. The house came down on itself. Sasuke looked on. He decided to intervene since he needed some practice. He then stepped down from the tree he was perched on. Sabertooth caught his scent. He then turned to look at Sasuke. So you're that kid Magneto talks about, huh? Well, I'm not impressed, grunted Sabertooth. Magneto? And you expect me to know that person? Asked a bored Sasuke. Wolverine dug out of the debris slowly. He then saw Sasuke, his eyes widened. No, go away kid, you're bothering me, said Sabertooth. Either move or I cut you down. Sasuke didn't budge. Sabertooth's anger got the better of him as he shouted at Sasuke. Wolverine was still digging himself out of the debris. I see, let's go, said Sasuke as he moved. He disappeared. Sabertooth's eyes widened as she appeared in front of him. Sasuke's Chidori blade hilt then connected with Sabertooth's chin, sending him flying off the ground. He then looked up and kicked him 2 times. The third one was laced with chakra as he sent Sabertooth flying. Wolverine's eyes widened. Just how strong is the runt? Questioned Logan. Sabertooth was in a daze as he fell from the sky, his form inverted. In a flash Sasuke was before him. Sasuke laced his punch with chakra and sent Sabertooth flying into a pile of rocks. He watched as the rocks crumbled on Sabertooth for the move. Check out Sasuke's Ultimate Ninja 5 on PS2. His Ultimate Just 2. Sasuke just looked on, as Wolverine came up to him, anger in his face. I don't fight your battles now, do I, runt? So stay out of my own, shouted Logan. Sasuke then sensed that this battle was personal. He respected Logan's wishes as he moved from the area. Before he went, runt, came Logan's voice. Sasuke stopped. Thanks for that. Sasuke just moved back to the mansion. It was easy to find the mansion since it was just a kilometer from where he fought Sabertooth. He then sat near the bark of a tree watching the birds in their nests tending to their young ones. He closed his eyes and he remembered his brother piggybacking him back home. Aurora came up to him and saw his resting form. She decided not to question him about his whereabouts. He was at peace. 2 hours later, Xavier Mansion. Scott and Kurt had returned from their school in the convertible and saw Sasuke up and well sleeping near a tree. Kurt wanted to wake him, so did Scott, but they stopped when Aurora threw a lightning bolt near their feet. They now knew that they shouldn't disturb the sleeping Uchiha. Scott, Kurt, do not disturb Sasuke, he's had a hard day, said Aurora. Yes ma'am, came the nervous reply in unison. Logan had come back and had told Aurora about how Sasuke easily took down Sabertooth with Sabertooth not even laying a finger on the runt. Logan was a little jealous. Aurora chuckled at Logan's jealous form. Kitty Pryde walked into the mansion with Jean at her side with the professor behind them. She had finally decided to come to live with them and to learn about her powers, about how it would be an asset to her as a gift. She was nervous as she was moving to a new state, and to meet new people who had powers just like her. She smiled at it. When she came to the mansion, she saw a beautiful lady with white hair curled up neatly and with chocolate brown skin. She smiled a wonderful smile when she saw Kitty. Jean then introduced her. Kitty, I would like you to meet Professor Monroe. Kitty shook her hand with her as she returned the smile. She then saw 2 boys coming down from the stairs. They were cute to her eyes. They then made their way to Jean and Kitty. Hey Jean. Looks like you made it back with another addition as well, smiled Scott. He then shook Kitty's hand. So did Kurt. Kitty blushed a bit as she shook their hands. Kitty, this is Scott Summers, and this is Kurt Wagner, smiled Jean. Xavier looked on and smiled. Their family was growing. Sasuke was then coming back to the mansion, to go to the danger room to train once again. He saw that Jean and the professor had returned with another addition, as they called. The girl was a small petite girl, presumably Kurt's age, with brown hair similar to his old style of how his hair was. Aurora then saw Sasuke. Sasuke. Come here and meet Kitty Pryde, said Aurora. Sasuke came up to her, his hands in his pockets. Kitty squealed. To her the sky was hot. She then extended her hand to shake Sasuke's hands. Sasuke looked at her, ignored her and then moved into the mansion to reach the danger room. Sasuke! Shouted Jean. Come back here. He just ignored her and continued down to the danger room. Jean sighed. Scott and Kurt in unison said, the loner strikes again. Jean just turned her glare on them. I'm sorry Kitty, but he's like that with everyone. It takes some time for him to get used to others, smiled Aurora. It's alright, said Kitty. Man, that guy is such a jerk, making Miss Aurora apologize for him. Xavier looked on. Charles, me and Logan have something to talk to you about, Sasuke, smiled Oro. Xavier raised an eyebrow. Oro was smiling. It wildly seemed something good happened while he was away after all. He smiled. Jean and the others just viewed Oro's smiling form. Gina then nudged Scott. What happened while we were anyway? She looked happier than usual, questioned Jean. Beats me, we were at school, came the reply. All right, let's get Kitty all settled in, said Kurt. Things got a lot more interesting for the residents of the Xavier Institute. Xavier Mansion, X-Jet Hangar. Professor Xavier had told Sasuke that the others had gone on a mission to retrieve another mutant. Sasuke just looked on. It had been approximately 6 hours since they had left and now they were coming back. Professor Xavier had asked him to come with him to welcome them back. Sasuke just sighed and followed. As the jet landed back in the hangar, Sasuke looked on in boredom. The loading bay door then opened to reveal Scott and 3 others. What really surprised Sasuke was that Oro had gone with them, and she was nowhere to be seen. It didn't really matter to him, but deep down he cared a little for the woman who was like a surrogate mother to him. He didn't show it, but he had developed a bond with the lady. It angered him and he was frustrated that someone actually formed a bond with him. Again, he silently cursed himself for his weakness. Xavier read all of Sasuke's thoughts, but this time he wanted to let Sasuke work out his feelings on his own. Sasuke just stared on as the others came down from the ramp. Professor, we failed. Mystique got to her before we did, came a sudden Scott's voice. Xavier looked on. She actually thought that we were gonna kill her. Professor, I don't know where she got that idea from, came a panicked Kitty's voice. Xavier shifted his gaze to look at her. It's alright, Kitty, let it go. Mystique must have used her powers to scare her. I'm afraid her plan worked, said Xavier, but rest assured, this battle may have been lost, but this war is far from over. The others smiled. Oh man. We almost forgot, Professor, that girl Kate, she used her powers on Storm and Nightcrawler. I think she absorbed them. She was overwhelmed, said Scott. Storm and Kurt are in the jet, they're out cold, said Jean. Do not worry, I believe their powers will come back to them when they regain consciousness, said Xavier. The others sighed in relief. I believe we should shift them back to their rooms, so that they can rest up. Kitty then turned her gaze to a moving Sasuke. Hey Sasuke. How was your day? Anything like new happened? Questioned Kitty. Sasuke ignored her as he went into the X-Jet. Kitty just looked on, shaking her head. AHHH. I'll never understand that boy, screamed Kitty. Scott just chuckled at her. Jean just looked on with amusement in her eyes. Xavier, however, wondered where Sasuke went. His question was then answered as he carried an unconscious Storm out of the X-Jet. The others' eyes widened as they followed Sasuke's movements. Xavier just smirked. Jean then accompanied Sasuke as he carried Storm back to her room. Scott, you and Kitty get Kurt back to his room. I need to go contact Logan, said Xavier as he rolled out of the room. So I guess he does care, right Scott? Questioned a smiling Kitty. Scott begrudgingly responded, yeah, I guess he does. X Mansion. Sasuke then set Oro down in her bedroom and closed the door behind him. As he went out, Jean followed him. Sasuke kept ignoring her. So the loner does have a heart? Questioned a smirking Jean. HN came the reply. Jean then continued walking with Sasuke. He grew annoyed. Jean knew he was getting annoyed. Sasuke, you don't have to be alone all the time and act like you don't care. I mean, we're here and we would love to get to know you. Come on, don't be like that, said Jean as her gaze softened. Sasuke stopped. He didn't look at her. A whisper caught her ear. Just leave me alone, whispered Sasuke. Jean then caught his hand. He stiffened and he grew annoyed. Not until you come out of that stupid shell you've made for yourself. We're your friends, Sasuke exclamation mark. Look, I know you lived a hard life, being lied to like that. I can't understand how it must have been for you, but we're here now. You're here now, come on, pleaded Jean. Sasuke's frustration grew. He gritted his teeth in annoyance. Each and every one of these people reminded him of the blonde idiot known as his best friend. And now this woman wouldn't stop pestering him. He pulled his hand from Jean violently and continued to walk. Jean looked hurt. She sighed. Jean, get ready. You and Logan are going to go meet a new mutant that has surfaced. Wear your civilian clothes. Logan will be waiting for you near the garage, communicated the professor. Right, Professor, replied Jean. She then made her way back to her room to change out of her attire and to move to the garage. Sasuke moved out of the mansion and went to his usual training place. Logan had seen Sasuke use his Chidori. He then wondered how he could improve Sasuke's training. When questioned about it, Sasuke said that the lightning propelled the blade to cut even the hardest of metals. Logan smirked. He then set up Sasuke with broken pieces of metal. In the shooter, he had asked Sasuke to cut the metal into 4 slices just as he had done the stumps of wood, all the while maintaining his bird current, and in midair, Sasuke decided to try it. He wanted to see if he could concentrate hard enough to maintain the Chidori while slicing the metal into 4 clean pieces. It was relatively easy for one of his skill. At first it proved a little difficult, but then Sasuke remembered his fight with the Eight Tails Jinchuriki. He had remembered how the Jinchuriki had balanced all his swords and had fought him. It propelled Sasuke to master his swordsmanship. At that moment Kitty came out of the mansion to get some fresh air. She saw Sasuke training again a distance. She decided to scare him. She then tiptoed towards him. A flash of lightning and the sound of birds chirping caught her off guard, as she saw Sasuke in midair, rotating in a semicircle while slicing the metals. Wow, she whispered. Sasuke then landed gracefully on the grass, putting his blade back in its cover. Kitty was in a daze as she saw 4 metal slices fall down in a neat row. Hey Sasuke, that was like awesome. Where'd you learn how to do that? She questioned him. Sasuke grew annoyed, first the one with red hair and now this petite girl. He ignored her. Oh come on, Sasuke, you can at least answer my question, shouted a frustrated Kitty. Sasuke continued to ignore her as he set the machine up once more. Kitty just blew her hair in frustration. Scott came up to where they were. Hey Kitty, what you doing over here with? Questioned a sarcastic Scott. Sasuke ignored him as the machine readied itself. Nothing, Scott. Just asking Sasuke over there about where he learned his mad sword skills from. As Kitty said that, Sasuke jumped and sent the Chidori down his blade. He then sliced the 2 pieces of metal into 8 clean cuts. It landed in a neat row behind him. As he landed, they then saw a motorcycle going out of the garage. Huh, I wonder where Logan's going with Jean? Questioned Scott. Told me that they found a new mutant in the area, so the professor asked them to go and see if we could get him to join us, replied Kitty. Sasuke's frustration grew. These people wouldn't leave him alone, as he readied the machine with 3 pieces of metal this time. Scott and Kitty made their way back to the mansion to look into Aurora's and Kurt's condition. Sasuke was relieved that they left. It would be a sleepless night for the Avenger, as he wanted to finish this training and move on to what other things Logan had in store for him. 3 hours later, Xavier Institute Field. Sasuke stopped his training as 48 pieces of metal fell from the sky. He was now glad that he could use his Chidori blade to cut down 12 pieces of hard metal without breaking a sweat. He was then brought out of his musings when Jean and Logan returned. Sasuke gazed at their form and then he returned to the machine. Logan parked the bike in the garage. He then told Jean that he would go and tell the professor what happened and that she should go get ready for school tomorrow. Jean complied. Logan then made his way to Sasuke. Oi Runt, how's the training going? Asked Logan. Sasuke lifted his head to meet Logan's and turned his eyes to the cut pieces of metals. Logan followed Sasuke's gaze. His eyes widened with shock. There were 400 pieces of metal cleanly lined on the grass. Logan almost fell over when he saw this. Whoa Runt, you've been busy. Sheesh, ha, now I can use these pieces to build another part of the garage, said Logan. Sasuke knew he had been suckered into doing Logan's dirty work. He let it pass. It was a good exercise for him. So Runt, the next thing you're going to do first thing tomorrow is the danger room. Chuck said that it's been updated to a higher level. Let's see how you do against that. Oh, and go get yourself showered. You stink of sweat, smiled Logan as he made his way back to the mansion to talk to the professor. Sasuke looked on at Logan's retreating form. After a few moments gazing at the metal pieces, he decided to take Logan's advice to get a shower. Unknown to him, Aurora and Kurt had awoken 2 hours before. Kitty had told Aurora that Sasuke had carried her back to her room. Aurora's eyes widened with surprise. She was glad Sasuke was opening up little by little. The others were seated at the table as Sasuke entered the mansion. Aurora saw Sasuke. "Sasuke, come and have something to eat," called Aurora. Sasuke saw her. A tinge of happiness made its way into his heart when he saw that she was alright. He quickly displaced it and moved on. "Runt! Get your butt over here and eat something," came Logan's voice. Sasuke gritted his teeth in annoyance as he made his way to the bathroom. Aurora followed him. "Sasuke, if you're gonna take a bath, you need a towel and a fresh set of clothes as well. Wait here while I get them for you. You are not going to keep wearing those clothes every day," said Aurora. Sasuke grew annoyed but complied as he waited near the bathroom. Aurora then returned to him with a towel and a fresh set of clothes, but what really caught his eye was the shirt. It had an Uchiha emblem on its back side. It was a simple black shirt with a collar, and a blue jeans pant with sports shoes to boot. Sasuke raised an eyebrow when he saw the shirt. Aurora caught it. "I figured out that you wouldn't wear anything else without this symbol on it, so I decided to sew one for you," said a smiling Aurora. Sasuke looked on, gratefulness in his eyes. Aurora smiled. He then made his way into the bathroom, closing its door, and headed to shower to wash off his tiredness and his sweat. He looked on as the water fell on his face, wondering why these people actually cared about him. If he was still in the ninja world, he would be a missing nin and hunter nins would be sent after him, but here he was lost. He barely fought anyone. He couldn't complete his revenge. The only thing that brought peace to his mind was that he had killed Danzo, one of the elders who led Itachi to his death. He savored it. He then finished his shower and put on the clothes Aurora gave for him, and made his way out of the bathroom. As he made his way out of the bathroom, Kitty and Kurt were walking down the hallway. When Kitty saw Sasuke, she started blushing furiously. Kurt just looked confused. "Sasuke, Miss Monroe told me to tell you to come down and to have something to eat," said Kurt. "Like right now, Sasuke," added Kitty. Sasuke just walked past them. Again, Kurt just sighed. Kitty grew frustrated at his antics. Sasuke made his way down the stairs of the mansion. He saw Jean and Scott conversing. He decided to ignore them and moved to go out of the mansion again. Scott then caught his shoulder. Sasuke really grew annoyed. "Sasuke, Aurora is waiting for you in the kitchen. She's made something for you to eat. Now go and eat it," pushed Scott. Sasuke pulled his shoulder away from Scott and moved out of the mansion. Jean sighed. "Give him some time, Scott. He's not ready yet," said Jean. "When will he ever be? Man, I'm glad he's not in school with us. I mean, can you imagine? I think he would kill Duncan the first chance he gets," chuckled Scott. Jean just elbowed him. "Hey, it's true, you know, and I for one will support Sasuke all the way if he ever does that," smiled Scott. Jean just shook her head at Scott's childish behavior. Logan told Professor Xavier what Sasuke had done when he fought Sabertooth. "You should have seen him chuck 4 shots and it's over. Sabertooth didn't even land a finger on him." Professor Xavier smirked. "Logan, is that jealousy I detect?" "Humph," grunted Logan as he crossed his arms over his chest. The professor then became serious. "If what you tell me is true, then I think Eric knows about Sasuke." "I see, this proves quite disturbing indeed," said Xavier as he continued his musings. Logan looked on. Sasuke fell asleep near a tree in the field, dreaming about his beloved brother. It never left his mind. Jean and Aurora were out for a late-night stroll as they conversed about the new mutant Jean and Logan had come across. They then came across Sasuke's sleeping form. He looked peaceful without a care in the world. Aurora then turned to Jean. "Stay with Sasuke, Jean. I'll go into the mansion and get him a blanket," said Aurora. "But why? I could just use my power and carry him back, right?" questioned a confused Jean. "Yes, but he enjoys it outside, and he wouldn't be too happy being inside the mansion again," said Aurora as she flew back to the mansion. Jean looked on at Sasuke's sleeping form. She sighed to herself. Sasuke was very stubborn. Oro then returned back to them with a blanket. She covered Sasuke with it. "I think it's best we go, Jean. You have school tomorrow," said Oro. "He may catch a cold," said a concerned Jean. "He won't," smiled Oro. They then moved back to the mansion. Sasuke was left to soundlessly sleep into his blissful dream. 2 days later, Danger Room. Sasuke was present in the Danger Room. Logan had told him about a new training regime in the Danger Room. Logan then came to the Danger Room. "Alright, Runt. This is the highest difficulty setting. Let's see if you can handle it. Chuck's gonna be watching you. If you can't take it, he'll deactivate it, alright?" said Logan. Professor Xavier looked on. "Alright, begin," said Logan. 2 blades made their way to Sasuke as he dodged them with ease. Another blade came to cut him in two. He dodged it in midair. The lasers then came online as they blasted Sasuke's form. Sasuke left an after image as he dodged another round of the lasers. "Get on the offensive, Runt. You don't have all day," shouted Logan from the command booth. Xavier looked on and was impressed with Sasuke's speed and agility. Sasuke's training continued. X Mansion. Everyone got ready as they made their way to Bayville High. Scott then revved up his convertible with everyone in the car. They then made their way to school. "I'm telling you, Jean, stay away from Fred. That guy is just plain trouble," said Scott. Jean just shifted her gaze to him. "He's just lost, Scott. He's not made any friends yet. Maybe that's why he acts the way he does," she replied. "He's trouble, Jean. The only good thing I saw him do is throw Duncan in the trash can," chuckled Scott. Jean just rolled her eyes. "I don't know, Scott. Maybe Jean's right. Maybe he just wants friends," said. Looked at her and agreed with her. Scott gritted his teeth. "I'm telling's nothing but trouble," continued Scott. "Scott, maybe you're just frustrated that he reminds you of Sasuke so much," smiled Jean. Scott then looked at her like she was crazy. "I do not," shouted Scott. Kurt and Kitty just smirked behind him. Jean then continued. "Oh, come on, Scott, don't tell me he doesn't remind you of Sasuke. I mean, come on, the both of them are alone and they don't actually fit in with people. Think of it as trying to prevent another Sasuke from taking form," smiled Jean. Scott sighed. "You bet, haha, Sasuke's way cooler than that dude," came Kurt's voice. Everyone chuckled at what Kurt said and they had agreed. 6 hours later, Bayville High School. School was now over. Scott told the others that he had to practice with Kate for his English drama play. Kurt and Kitty then went back to the mansion. Logan was waiting for them to train them. They sulked when Logan told them that they would be training for 2 whole hours. Sasuke was currently laying near a tree, watching the birds. Oro had gone out to give an order for 2 more clothes with Sasuke's emblem on it. She then promised her Cyril to ask what the emblem meant. Jean, however, was in a dire situation. At that moment, Fred Dukes was harassing her to come with him as he wanted to show her something. Jenna had refused, stating that she had better things to do. Just then a construction wooden base fell on them. Jean shouted in panic. Fred covered her with his body, but in doing so, she lost consciousness. Fred then took her to an old ironwork factory in the south end of Bayville. When Jean came to, she was tied up. She then saw Fred. A conversation ensued. Jean said that she wanted to be a friend to Fred, but Fred mistook it for love. When she learned she could not persuade Fred, she sent a distress signal to Professor Xavier and, surprisingly, Sasuke. Professor Xavier was currently watching Kitty and Kurt do a training exercise. He smiled when Kitty phased through Kurt and caught the ball. Kurt then fell down on the ground face first. Logan face blamed. "What kind of move is that?" said Logan. Xavier chuckled. "Evasion, adaptation, that's what they're here to learn, Logan," chuckled the professor. He then gritted his teeth as Jean's message came through. "Calm down, Jean. Yes, I understand," said the professor. "Logan, she's been kidnapped," said Professor Xavier in a serious tone. Logan then turned his gaze to Kitty and Kurt. "You Smurf," said Logan, pointing at Kurt. "Get shades and suit up. I'm gonna ride. Red's been kidnapped." Kitty then ran to the garage behind Logan, and revved up the van. Kurt then transported to where Scott was with Rogue. They were currently practicing their lines. Kurt then appeared. "Oops, sorry, bad time?" smiled a sheepish Kurt. "I swear this guy's like an annoying brother," snarled Rogue. Kurt just showed his tongue to Rogue. "Kurt, why are you here?" asked Scott. Kurt then recovered from his childish antics. "It's Jean. She's been kidnapped by Blob." Scott gritted his teeth and banged the table. He then looked to Rogue. Did you know anything about this?" questioned the panicked Scott. Rogue then turned her head to look at Scott. "No. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you," said a frustrated Rogue. "Then I hope you can love with yourself," shouted Scott. "Teleport us at maximum speed," said Scott as he grabbed Kurt's shoulder. Aye, sir," came Kurt's reply. Sasuke gritted his teeth in annoyance when the message came through. "Sasuke. Help please." He was annoyed. "Why should I care?" thought the Avenger. Xavier then came up to Sasuke. "Sasuke, Jean's been kid." Before Xavier finished his statement, Sasuke did it for him. "I know, I don't care." Xavier sighed. "Sasuke, do this as a favor for me, the others may not be able to take Blob down and rescue her." Sasuke gritted his teeth. He then nodded his head. As he saw Logan's bike moving, he ran after it, following it from treetop to treetop. Xavier smiled. His mood shifted when the others came up to him. "Professor?" came the question from Scott's mind. A display then lighted up in front of Xavier. "Jean is being held somewhere in this area. Logan already went after her." "Right," said Scott as he and Kurt ran to his convertible. "Professor, where's Sasuke?" questioned Kitty. Xavier smiled. "He already left. It seems Jean sent him a message as well. Now go, Kitty, quickly." Old Ironworks, Bayville South End. Wolverine came to a stop near the old ironworks. He sniffed the air and smiled. He then looked at his watch. "Chuck, I found her. She's near the old ironworks." "Logan, wait for backup," came the reply. Wolverine ignored him and went on. Little did he know that Sasuke watched him as he entered the factory. When Sasuke followed Logan, it had surprised him of how technologically advanced this world was. He saw machines on wheels transporting people. He was intrigued. He quickly shoved it off as he followed Logan. Upon arrival, Sasuke decided to just watch. He sat on the branch of a tree. A fight then ensued. Wolverine was thrown out of the building by a large boy. Sasuke viewed him skeptically. He reminded Sasuke of the boy from the Sound Village who had come to get him to escort him to Orochimaru. He quickly shook the memory as he saw Wolverine fight the fat boy. He was getting pummeled. He then decided to intervene, but he saw the others arrive and fight him. He then relaxed as he watched the fight. One by one they were all taken down. Blob then lifted Scott and threw him at Logan. They both crashed into Logan's bike. They were out cold. Sasuke then caught another presence. He decided to ignore a pale white-skinned girl, with an overcoat, shirting and shoes. He hopped down from the tree and moved into the ironworks. Rogue looked on and followed him. "Who's he?" she thought. Blob was alerted to Sasuke's presence. "You. What do you want?" shouted Blob. Sasuke's eyes searched for Jean. He found her behind Blob, tied up. Blob followed his gaze. He smirked. "You want her? Fine, you can have her, only after I crush her," shouted Blob. "Sasuke. Get back, he's too powerful," shouted a panicked Jean. Sasuke thought of using genjutsu and getting it over as quickly as possible, but he decided, since it was a long time since he fought, he decided to take this overweight buffoon for a spin. Blob lifted a table to smash Jean. Before he could do that, the table was sliced into pieces by Sasuke. Blob looked shocked as Sasuke landed in front of him. He then looked at Blob and ignored him. He moved to untie Jean. Before he could do just that, Blob ran to crush him. Sasuke caught his gigantic arm with ease. He then flipped Blob to the other side of the building. Rogue looked on with awe. So did Jean. Sasuke looked bored. Blob's rage built. As he aimed another punch for Sasuke's head, Sasuke caught his hand once more, with his eyes closed. "You're an annoyance," he said. As he opened his eyes, electricity crackled around his body. "Chidori stream," whispered Sasuke. Blob was electrocuted. The force sent him spinning outside of the building, all the while being shocked. He survived, but he was out cold. Rogue's eyes widened. Sasuke then met her eyes. Rogue looked into Sasuke's cold black eyes. She shivered under his gaze. His lifeless eyes brought up fear in her that she had never experienced. He then ignored her and went to Jean. Jean was in shock. Sasuke had easily taken down Blob. He sliced the ropes off her arms and legs. She looked up at him. "Thanks, Sasuke," she said as she stood up. Sasuke didn't look back when she thanked him. Others came rushing in when they saw Blob beaten and out cold on the ground. As Sasuke was about to move out of the building, Jean caught his shoulder. Sasuke sighed in annoyance. Jean then kissed his cheek. Sasuke's eyes widened. The others saw the peck Jean gave to Sasuke. Scott was jealous. "Thanks," she said. Sasuke grew frustrated. He quickly pulled himself away from her. He was annoyed. "Tch," he muttered as he made his way past the other X-Men and continued back to the Masnian. The others watched his retreating form. Kitty just chuckled at Sasuke's behavior. Logan smiled. Kurt was teasing Jean about that peak, and Scott just looked on. Rogue had made her way out of the building after her encounter with Sasuke. Xavier Institute Field. Sasuke was gazing into the sky when he heard the rolling of wheels. Professor Xavier approached Sasuke. "Thank you for saving Jean, Sasuke," said a smiling Professor Xavier. His statement was met with silence. "I'm sure your brother would be proud of you for what you did," said Xavier. Sasuke gritted his teeth in frustration. Anything related to Itachi frustrated him to no end. It raised a lot of questions of how Itachi could die like that, how he had been lied to. "How could you die like that, Itachi? You died without fear, with a smile on your face. What does that make of me?" questioned a sorrowful Sasuke. Both the professor and Sasuke looked on at the stars. Xavier then left, thanking him once again. Sasuke just watched his retreating form. "Someday I'll understand why you did what you did, Itachi, someday, but until my revenge is complete, that day won't come soon enough," though the crazed Avenger. That's it. Now please comment for a part 2.